Educator.com's Advanced PHP with MySQL course. In today's lesson, we're going to be discussing the topic of magic methods again, which, as we learned in our constructors lesson, is a special type of method in PHP. We're going to be specifically getting into a little more details about what magic methods actually are in PHP. We've used them before when we talked about a constructor. That's a magic method in PHP, but now we're going to sort of provide a more formal definition of that. We're going to talk about what are known as destructors, which in PHP is a special magic method. Then we're going to talk about three different magic methods in PHP: underscores toString, underscore get, and underscore set. And then we're also going to talk about the concept of access modifiers, which relates to declaring, for example, all of our properties and functions so far have had the public keyword listed before them. So we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is and how we're going to change that. And then in general, we're going to finish up talking about using getters and setters in general, which are ways to get and set properties of a particular object. So in PHP, any method that basically starts with this, which is a double underscore, are known as magic methods. And basically, anytime you create an object or a class file, you shouldn't create any methods that begin with an underscore, because PHP sort of reserves the right to, in the future, use those as magic methods. In particular, you wouldn't want to name, for example, we know construct is a magic method. So you wouldn't want to define your own construct method in a PHP class unless you're actually planning on using it as a constructor, because otherwise PHP is going to treat it as a constructor, and it's not going to be something you could sort of run on your own. Magic methods are special in that they're automatically called by PHP. For example, we know a constructor, whenever you use a new statement, for example, new item, pass it some data, this construct method is implicitly called by PHP. It's automatically called by PHP, and that's why you don't want to name methods construct, because then, for example, if you had an item object, you wouldn't really be able to call that construct method. And there are a number of different magic methods that are available to objects in PHP, and we're going to be talking about a number of those different ones that are available in today's lesson. So first of all, I want to talk about a concept of a destructor. It's sort of the analog to a constructor. A constructor is called automatically when a new instance of an object is created. Now, on the other hand, when an instance of an object is destroyed, which means that it essentially means that it's no longer being used anymore, you can have a method called a destructor that's called, and basically what that sort of does is it's used to clean up any object state before the object is essentially destroyed. So for example, maybe you have some open files that were used by a particular object. By having this destructor method that always gets called, and it's something that if you define it always gets called automatically by PHP, then you can ensure that all your files will always be closed, which is a good practice so that you don't have file locking issues and stuff like that. That's just one particular example, but it basically allows you to do any sort of, allows you to run any code that you'd like to run every time an object is sort of destroyed before its lifetime ends. And it's automatically called anytime an object is no longer being used. So for example, when the script ends, or if an object is explicitly set to not be used, which means you can call the unset method, or you explicitly set it to null. That's basically telling PHP you don't need that object anymore. When that occurs, the destructor is automatically called. In PHP, destructors are magic methods, and they have a name similar to construct, except it's double underscore destruct. And it's within this method that you can define any operations or code that you'd like to occur whenever an object is destroyed or gets destructed by PHP. So for example, let's take a look at, we have a class here called data file that we're going to sort of be building up during this lecture. And what data file is a class that's going to sort of encapsulate all the things that we do for a file. For example, we use fopen, fclose, and fwrite to open, write, and close a particular file. What we're going to do is we're sort of going to wrap that functionality into this object called data file. And what we're going to do for example, is for each data file object, we're going to give it a file name and an access mode. And then what you can do is, after you create this data file object, you can run an open function on it, which we're going to see. Then you can run a write operation on it and a close operation on it. And basically those open and close operations are calling basically underneath the service contained within the object's code, these fopen, fgets, fclose methods, and so forth. So that's what our data file class is going to be used for. It's to represent access to a data file. In this first version, we're just going to give it one property, called a public property called file name. And as you can see here, we have our function, our constructor function, which is a magic method that takes one parameter, and it basically just sets the value of our file name property. We also have an echo statement here, and this is going to be used to kind of show how PHP is working behind the scenes. That basically just says, okay, we're in the data file constructor. And then here's a new magic method, the destruct method. And it just simply outputs a message that says we're in the destructor. We're actually going to be improving on this so that this destructor method will actually close any open files that we may have open. But for now, we're just going to output a message so you can see at what point during a particular script the destructor gets called. So for example, we include our data file class in this particular script called Destructor.php. We output a message that says before the object is created. Then we call the constructor, which is implicitly going to call the construct method. So we should see an output message, that output message from our construct method we defined. Then we output a message stating that this is the last statement in the script, and then the script ends. And then what we should notice, or will notice, is that actually another statement gets output. It's the statement that's saying we're in the destructor, because when the script ends, basically the lifetime of this data file object that we created in the script is no more, and it's going to be destroyed, and so PHP automatically calls the destruct method. So if we run this particular version of Destructor.php, we can see we have a statement, but this is before the object is created. The next thing that happens is you're inside the constructor. Then you can see that we execute the last statement in the script, and yet even though we've executed the last statement in the script, we actually have another piece of output, and it says inside the data file destructor. So that shows you that when that script ends, if any objects are still haven't been destroyed yet, they actually destructors still get called, and so code is actually even running even though we're not in the script anymore. An alternative version to that is here we have the same data file class in this new version, but what we're going to do is instead we're going to say the output the message says this is before the object is created. We're going to call its constructor, and then we're going to explicitly destroy the object by null, which by setting it equal to null, which, as we mentioned on the slide, is essentially going to call that destruct method because the object exists no more. So what's going to happen is, because the destructor gets called here, that message that says you're in the destructor is going to get output before we actually get to this last output statement within our script. So the order of those last two statements are going to change. So if we go over here to version 2 of this, now we can see the output before the object is created. We're inside the constructor, we're inside the destructor, and then we execute the last statement in the script. And the reason that in data file destructor doesn't occur afterwards as well is because the object has already been destroyed. It's already had its destruct method called, and it was called when we set it equal to null. So here in this case, when the last statement of the script ends, the script actually ends in that particular case, and no destructors get called. Oops.